and collaboration, being engaged in your communities, and learning from innovative efforts of what's happening at all levels. So we hope that you will consider ways to promote more equitable communities for all children and families through your knowledge and growth. If you do have any questions as we go along, please use the chat box so that the moderator, Serena, can address those with the group and the presenters at the end of the presentation. So you will remain on mute throughout the presentation. And if you have a need for a certificate, things like that, all of those will be emailed out within the next couple of weeks. So just be looking for that. And we want to thank the Tennessee chapter for the National Association of Social Workers for providing the CEUs for this event. And of course, we want to thank Building Strong Brains Tennessee for sponsoring the event. And so now I'd like to just take a few minutes to introduce our wonderful presenters today. So we have Dr. Keith Bailey with the Harmony Family Center. They're located in Knoxville. He is the training director and has been since 2016. He has over 30 years experience working with children and families. So he served children in residential treatment and foster care and has worked for a consultant for UT Social Work Office of Research and Public Service. So he's done a lot of training with child welfare staff and foster parents, and is a huge asset to the Family Center, Harmony Family Center. So we also have Kendall Akers, and she's the clinical training manager in Harmony's Adoption Support and Preservation Program. So she has her master's degree in family, marriage and family therapy, and she has over 13 years of experience working with children and adults who have a history of complex trauma. And then we also have Lauren Thomas. She's a licensed master's in social work, and she will be sharing with us some information. She's currently in a role of a family therapist with the same Adoption and Guardian Support and Preservation Program. And she also is a registered yoga teacher for Harmony. So we're looking forward to today and learning more about the neurosequential model of therapeutics. So they all have some level of certification in the neurosequential model and lots of training on trauma, and everything that we're going to learn today is rooted in lots of trauma work and the neurosequential model. So we're really looking forward to it. I know I'm very excited to hear. So we'll let you go ahead and get started. Thank you.
All right, thank you. It is a pleasure to be with you all. We are honored at Harmony to have this opportunity to share in this journey of understanding the impact of trauma on the body and the brain and how to use the best interventions based upon the latest neuroscience. So today I'm going to start out telling you a little bit about Harmony, how we use some of these techniques in our programs. I'm going to talk about the science and the theory behind it, and then Kendall and Lauren are going to come along and make sense of the science and the theory and the application. So I want to just tell you a little bit about our programs. We started out as an adoption service 24 years ago, and we do all things adoption, from home studies to preparing families through training, and then supporting families during adoption. And we have a whole team of therapists that go in adopted families' homes to help them work out any relational, behavioral issues, family life issues with them. We also have programs that help the Department of Children's Services in Tennessee find permanent homes for kids who are in full guardianship as well. And we also help finalize some adoptions with the Department of Children's Services. We also have a large training program. We partner with DCS to train all the level 1 foster parents across the state. We just had a virtual foster parent conference, since we can't have a live one. We had 2,600 people registered for that conference. And then we do professional development and school and community-based training throughout the state. And sometimes we get the opportunity to go to other states to do that training as well. Last year, we trained over 14,000 people through all our variety of training programs. And the year before that, I'm proud to say we trained the national staff and interns for the Freedom Schools, which is out of the Children's Defense Fund. So we trained 1,200 staff in trauma-informed education and how to use trauma-responsive techniques in their interactions with kids in their programs. And then we have therapeutic services outside our adoption and guardianship support preservation program. We have an outpatient therapeutic services program. And then we have a camp, a lovely camp called Camp Montvale, where we get to play and do all these things we're going to talk about. We have therapeutic day camp for kids. We have therapeutic family camps for adoptive families. We have grandfamily camps for grandparents who are raising their children. We have other groups who come out and use the camp. We do professional development there. We have retreats, and it's just a wonderful place to get to put some of this into action in a beautiful setting at the foothills of the Smoky Mountains. So as Tennessee was developing the Building Strong Brains curriculum and sending that out across the state, Harmony was taking a deep dive in trauma assessment and trauma intervention through a 5-year federally funded research project that came about through the Children's Bureau that looked at the adoption process from beginning to end. And we were asked to be involved in the intensive services post-adoption, and that's where we were introduced to Dr. Bruce Perry and his work with the neurosequential model of therapeutics. So for 5 years, we were part of that research project, and for 5 years, we've been studying with Dr. Perry using the ACEs Building Strong Brains curriculum and using other trauma-informed techniques in our services and promoting it through our training as well. So as you read in the write-up, we've known for thousands of years that movement is good for the body, and we're starting to revisit that. We're now trying to promote movement for overall health, and probably for the last 20 years, we've been discovering how good movement is for the brain and the mind and the soul as well. So we think movement is important for your work with kids, no matter what environment they're in. It's good for just healthy development. It's good in education. We say movement in this approach is good for all kids, and it is absolutely necessary for kids who come from backgrounds of high stress and trauma. As we found from the ACEs study, which I know you're very, very familiar with, there is that connection with the impact on the brain and body and how that translates into behavior and life potential. But just beyond the impact of ACEs on the body, you see that list to your right of all the individual domains that we know high stress and trauma can impact. From the biology of the body, whether that's presented in kind of a hyper-aroused response to stress and trauma or a dissociative response. It also impacts attachment, affect regulation, behavior and cognition, and even to self-concept. So what we want to establish in this presentation today is how our therapists use movement in the healing process. So we incorporate it with children, we incorporate it with families, and we're finding that more and more people are incorporating movement to help in all these domains, even for adults who've experienced trauma. Let me go back a slide. So I said that we were introduced to the neurosequential model of therapeutics, and that is just a god-awful name for a therapeutic approach. It is so complex, and so it's helpful to break it down. Neurosequential just means it's the sequence or order in which the brain develops. Model means something we all know, life experiences impact both brain development, body development, and behavior. And therapeutics means there's lots of different types of interventions that can be considered for children. So sometimes there's criticism of this model that it's not an evidence-based model. It's not intended to be. It is a lens to view trauma, and that helps us to find evidence-based interventions that are rooted in science. They may be evidence-informed, or they may be traditional healing practices that we've used in cultures for thousands of years, like yoga and drumming, animal-assisted therapy, and even play as a model for therapeutic intervention. So this is a good, succinct definition of the neurosequential model. As I said, it's not a specific therapeutic technique or intervention. It's a developmentally sensitive, neurobiologically informed approach to clinical work. So when we use this lens to do an assessment, we're not just looking at adverse childhood experiences, and we're not limiting ourselves to those 10 on the ACEs survey. We're looking at adverse childhood experiences in different developmental stages, from in utero to where the child is now in their development. We're also looking at relational health as well, because one thing the ACEs study didn't tell us is that good, healthy relationships, good, healthy caregivers, good, well-resourced communities can buffer the impact of adverse childhood experiences and trauma. We also want to look at their current functioning, and we don't necessarily look at diagnosis, because diagnosis tends to be based upon symptomology. We want to look at what's going on neurologically, neurobiologically with the kids and how that manifests. And then we're also looking at current relational health as well with the children. And the person who is the purveyor of this approach is Dr. Bruce Perry. Some of you may be very familiar with him in his book, The Boy Who's Raised as a Dog, where he lays out this application of neuroscience to therapeutic intervention. And as you see, he has been a high-profile figure in some of our nation's tragedies, giving advice to how parents, teachers, community members, and health practitioners can help individuals and communities to heal from this. But we don't limit ourselves to Dr. Perry and his knowledge. You see this list on the left-hand side of this slide. The many folks who are contributing to this application of neuroscience to the healing process. Bessel van der Kolk, Peter Levine, and his somatic experiencing. You're going to hear about Elizabeth Warner and sensory motor regulation treatment, Francine Shapiro, EMDR, Dan Siegel, who helps parents understand neuroscience and to use it in parenting, and even Karen Purvis, who helps us with the relational part of that intervention. So here's just a very succinct definition of trauma, and we also want to bring neglect into the mix here. And this is kind of a definition of trauma that I've cobbled together with all the complex definitions that's out there. It's the presence of experience that causes a compromised sense of safety and an overwhelmed stress response system. And then we also want to factor in the impact of neglect. And it's something that we haven't talked about a lot, we haven't researched a lot, but we're starting to understand the impact of neglect on the brain and body. So whereas trauma is the presence of these experiences, neglect is the absence of essential developmental experiences that help the child to reach their ultimate potential in development. And it's also the absence of organizing experiences, not just what is happening in the brain and the body, but what's going on in the mind, how they make sense of the world around them. And we know that most of the children coming into the child welfare system in Tennessee is coming in due to neglect. This is a great quote from Albert Wong, who wrote an article for Psychology Today. And the title of that article is "You Can't Think Your Way Out of Trauma." And in this article, he said, trauma impacts much more than just our prefrontal cortex or our behavioral activation system. It impacts our whole being. It must be treated from a whole being perspective. Importantly, any legitimate trauma treatment must consider all of our being, the entirety of our body, mind, and not just our thoughts and behaviors alone. And there is a reference for that if you'd like to read that article online. This is the model of the brain that we use in studying with Dr. Perry, and I could spend a whole hour or a whole day just unpacking this. But he takes the most complex thing on earth and breaks it down into something that us non-neuroscientists can understand. And so we look at the brain in 4 different sort of sections. And you see at the bottom that it's through that sensory and somatic area of the brain that some of the main neurotransmitters come forth and impact the brain. So we know that the brain develops from the bottom up, and we know that trauma impacts the brain from the bottom up, and that we have memories in each of these sections of the brain. A lot of times we think of memory in the more cognitive sense, that we have information stored, we recall it, we bring it up and use it for problem solving, but we have sensory memories, we have somatic memories, we have emotional memories, and cognitive memories. And those are processed in all parts of the brain. And we know that trauma impacts which part of the brain is processing it most and how that part of the brain communicates with others. Let me give you an example of how a trauma can be processed in different parts of the brain and at different levels. If you touch a hot pot on the stove, that's going to be processed at those two lower levels, that sensory and somatic level. And thank goodness we're hardwired to think about it much more and just pull our hand away. Now, we may get upset in that limbic portion at ourselves or whoever left that pot there. You think about somebody who has the trauma of being in a house fire or even witnessing a house fire, and how that's processed at the sensory level, the somatic level, the emotional level, that fear, and also the cognitive level, trying to make sense of it. Now, you think about a kid who has cigarettes pushed into his arm or leg or neck by an abusive adult as a form of punishment or a way to control or coerce that child, and how that can be processed at all these different levels and create sensory memories, somatic memories, emotional memories, and cognitive memories. And what happens in trauma, there's a fragmentation of these memories. The brain, because of it being overwhelmed by high stress or trauma, doesn't really connect all those memories. And what we try to do in therapy is either connect them or make sense of them in a more linear, traditional way, or help the person create some new positive memories, especially if there have been pervasive developmental trauma. And just very quickly, before I turn it over to Kendall, I want to focus on one aspect of the brain and one of the neurotransmitters, dopamine. Dopamine is a part of purposeful movement, and it's part of the reward system. So here on the right-hand side, you see a child moving. Moving is a part of our development. We move to survive and to explore. A child moves toward a food source very early on. It moves to a caregiver's voice, to make eye contact, to touch, and it gets rewarded for that. Later on, movement is exploring and purposeful, and then you start to get that different level of social reward from a caregiver, a family member, friends, teachers, community, society, and that builds in not just to the somatic sense of reward with dopamine, but it also builds into the limbic part of reward. And then we hope that that will go forward to the cortex and the motivation to acquire more information, so you can do more problem solving, find more solutions, get more, achieve more, or have the right amount of what you want. And we call that motivation, which is based on movement, motility, moving forward. And when people don't get that in a proper developmental way like this child, they may start to substitute things, such as substances, such as sweet, salty, fatty foods, gaming, sex, violence, other things to get that dopamine reward that's not coming through relationships and not coming through purposeful movement. And what we want to do in therapy is when someone has trauma, stress, or even if there's organic issues that are causing this lack of purposeful movement, this lack of the dopamine reward that should be built in our brain through relationships, we want to find ways to reestablish some of those old healthy dopamine rewards and relationships that are there, or help to build new ones and create new neural memories at the sensory level, somatic level, limbic relational level, and the cognitive level. So we come to this mantra of how do you make sense of all the neuroscience when you're not a neuroscientist. First you must regulate, then you relate, and then you're able to reason and reflect. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kendall Akers, who's going to help make sense of this and talk about putting therapy into motion.
Thanks so much, Keith. So you all have heard a bit about our theory behind why we do what we do, and now we'll be talking a bit about specific ways we use movement and therapeutic modalities to help children and families move towards healing. So I've got several pictures here for you to see. And these are our approach at Harmony may be described as non-traditional because we've found that having just 1 hour of once a week is often ineffective. 1 hour of talk therapy once a week is often pretty ineffective at addressing the ways complex trauma has impacted all areas of an individual's life. So cutting-edge research has taught us that engaging in activities that incorporate things like movement, rhythm, repetition, healthy connections with others, including animals, you see that, even if it's just a few minutes at a time. If we give that child doses of those types of activities throughout their day, and their bodies can be more calm and regulated throughout the day, their brains are going to be more likely to absorb and recall these healthy coping strategies that we're trying to teach them. Also, we know that having children feel regulated in their bodies for longer periods of time throughout the day is healing for them. We want to ensure that the activities we're doing with children are rewarding, and we want to learn about them. We find out what their interests are, and we customize our treatment plans and the activities that we do with them to find things that they enjoy doing, things that they're interested in, where supportive, calm adults are present. And we try to facilitate experiences where these children are moving toward others and others are moving toward them in safe and supportive ways. You, of course, see those activities on the screen, but we also, include elements of movement like dance by having a dance class available for children and youth at our day camp, as well as during individual therapy, having clients of ours do movement or dance motions just to describe or to express their emotions or their experiences that they've had. This is a list of movement-based approaches that we found to be most effective for helping individuals with trauma histories heal. These types of approaches are going to create new sensory and somatic connections in the brain, and we will take a deeper look at SMART, Theraplay, and trauma-informed yoga in our presentation today. So I'm just going to briefly explain some of these modalities that are listed here. You see ARC, Attachment Regulation and Competency. This is a framework for intervention with youth and families, and it identifies 3 core domains that are usually impacted among traumatized youth. And these are going to be areas that are important for building up future resiliency in these youth. So it's focused on building healthy attachment, improving capacity for regulation, and increasing a sense of competency in areas of interest that they may have. ARC is designed for youth from early childhood to adolescence, and it involves their caregivers and caregiving systems. You also see trust-based relational intervention, which we call TBRI. This is an attachment-based trauma-informed intervention that was designed to meet the complex needs of vulnerable children. And it uses empowering principles to address physical needs that they have, connecting principles to address attachment needs that they have, and correcting principles to disarm fear-based behaviors that we often see in traumatized children. It is developed out of attachment theory, understanding sensory processing, and neuroscience research. And it has the ultimate goal of connecting that child with caregivers and their caregiving systems. So it offers practical tools for parents, caregivers, teachers, anyone really who works with children so that they can understand the whole child and help children reach their highest potential. So both TBRI and play therapy allow the child to work out issues that they are facing with movement, things like doing redos, whenever they make mistakes, whenever they don't handle situations appropriately. They have the opportunity to physically do that over and to repair an interaction that they had that was maybe harmful. It encourages pro-social actions, and they get to practice these strategies over and over again. You also see EMDR, which stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. And for a while, I thought that this was sort of a crazy and very odd intervention. But then I became trained in it, and I found that it's really helpful and effective. It was originally developed by Dr. Francine Shapiro as a psychotherapy treatment to alleviate the distress associated with traumatic memories. It uses this bilateral stimulation to embed new healthy resources into neuronal brain pathways to prepare the individual for the healing process. So it helps give them resources before they delve deep into processing traumatic memories. It does take a 3-pronged approach where past events that are connected to dysfunction are identified, the current circumstances that elicit distress are targeted, and then templates of possible future events are incorporated so that they can have more adaptive functioning in their life. So I have found that EMDR is really helpful and effective because of that bilateral stimulation of getting both sides of the brain engaged in order to support resources, the client developing resources, and to be able to process and include those problem-solving capacities. Then you see at the bottom equine therapy, and that is something that we also offer at our beautiful Camp Montvale. We have equine therapy available, and sometimes it's known as equine-assisted therapy. So it includes equine activity, which means live horses, and it promotes physical, occupational, and emotional growth in people who have faced many different challenges, including trauma, but also, other things as well, both issues related to emotional and mental health, but also related to physical health issues. So it can help that individual build confidence, self-efficacy, communication, trust, social skills, things like that. And oftentimes with kids we see and work with, it's a lot less scary for them to connect with a horse than it is with another human being. So it helps to break down those relational barriers that are sometimes there. Many of the children that we serve move up and down this arousal continuum from, this kind of place of sloth mode on the far left, where we call that hypoarousal. So what that might look like would be a child who's very withdrawn, depressed, not really engaging in activities in their environment or in relationships with other people. And then all the way to the other side of the arousal continuum to this hyper-aroused person who seems to move at the speed of light. Their movements are very fast, or you notice when they've been in a room because it's like a tornado just came through. So what we do in our approach to treatment is that we provide up or down regulating activities according to that child's need, where they are on that arousal continuum. And we also teach caregivers to do the same. So for me, if I'm feeling sort of tired or slothful, I might need to take a brisk walk or listen to some upbeat music to do that upregulating activity and help myself wake up and be engaged. Or if I'm feeling stressed or sort of like I have all this anxious energy, then I may need to do some gentle stretching, reading, listening to calm music before bed, things like that. And so we build in different regulation promoting activities where we help to widen this window of tolerance. For example, for young children, we use a game where it's, clap like a mouse and then clap like an alligator, right? So they're doing very small, quiet motions, and then they're doing very large motions. And it helps them learn about kind of moving more slowly and then moving fast as well. And then for teens, a lot of people will ask, gosh, what do you do for teens? They don't want to do anything. Now, we found some things that they do want to do, right? TikTok is really popular these days. And so something you can have them do is ask them to show you an appropriate TikTok dance. So, show me your TikTok dance, do it fast, do it slow. As long as it's appropriate, you can incorporate that into just helping them regulate throughout the day. And often our therapists at Harmony will work with families to create a regulation plan to help children stay regulated throughout their day, or some families and children we notice that need an additional level of support from, being able to work with an occupational therapist to create a sensory diet. So I'm going to talk a bit about I told you earlier we were going to talk more in depth about some specific approaches that we use. One of them is SMART. And the goal of SMART is to help individuals learn to stay in this window of tolerance and to be able to widen their window of tolerance. So I think about it like a house. And so what you want to do is stay in that middle, that main floor of the house, in that zone of regulation. And then if you're feeling a little bit angry or a little bit anxious, you might be feeling in that place of being through the roof. Or if you're feeling, again, that sloth mode, it may be, feeling like you're in the basement. And some of our children we've noticed will move into this auto-regulation, which is called dissociation. It's where they kind of check out. Kind of like the lights are on, but you can tell that nobody's home. So we help parents to tune into that and to notice that and to be able to, do some movement activities whenever they're seeing that happen. So a lot of times children have trauma adaptations, right? Things that they've developed in order to survive early traumatic experiences. And a lot of times, what we try to do is to help them whenever we're seeing those trauma adaptations come out. A lot of times we know that they're, a child's strategies might be less effective, but they are literally their best effort to regulate and meet their own needs. So the goal of using the SMART therapy approaches help so that they can move from feeling overwhelmed in their body to a place of calm by using body and sensory-based tools, including movement, to help them feel more regulated. Here are some different benefits that we see whenever people use SMART. Of course, it begins with movement and sensation and exploration and curiosity as routes to better regulation. What I like about it is it doesn't rely on language. A lot of our children really struggle with that. I even had a teenage boy who I was talking with, and he said he said, you know, I always really look forward to our sessions together, even though I have another therapist, I look forward to our sessions. And something I know that I do is I bookend my session with these sensory-based, movement-based activities. And so I'm guessing that he felt regulated at the beginning and the end of our session, whereas other therapists he was working with was just having him narrative, you know, talk about all of his trauma, and then maybe didn't do those regulating movement-based activities with him to calm him down. He also said that the other therapist asked too many questions. So avoiding too much language is a good thing. The embodied play helps to integrate the mood and help to kind of even it out a little bit. A lot of times we see up and down mood. It does focus on the present moment, and through that, this coherent narrative sort of emerges. A child that I was working with actually was on a sensory swing in our sensory room, and she just kind of automatically out of nowhere brought up a traumatic memory, and we didn't know where that came from, but Mom said that was the first time she had ever talked about that in therapy. So it was helpful for her to start moving into that place. Some things that we do is SMART therapy utilizes these 5 basic senses, which we see here on the screen, and it helps children just, ground to the present moment and feel calm in their bodies. We also know about these additional, several other sensory systems that are at play, and these are incorporated into this therapeutic time, these different activities that we encourage and incorporate into our therapies. So if you see a child who's, sitting upside down to watch TV, a lot of times they get in trouble for that, but we know that that might be a vestibular need that they have where their body needs to be upside down to feel calm. Another aspect of treatment and modality that we use is called Theraplay. This was developed about 50 years ago by Ann Jernberg and Phyllis Booth, and it is a child and family-based system approach. So in treatment, a practitioner is going to work with that parent to help be tuned into that child and do different activities where we're encouraging that caregiver to be responsive, attuned, empathic, and reflective. And so, again, it uses that direct here and now approach, and it really helps to bring in a multisensory approach, including use of touch. So, of course, we're going to be sensitive to that child's needs, but it just helps them get comfortable with that closeness and intimacy, and it also includes playfulness, which, of course, is a child's language. So who can benefit from Theraplay? Children with many different needs can benefit from Theraplay, from those facing social challenges and attachment problems to those dealing with depression, anger, noncompliance, even the autism spectrum. I really love this quote. It says, resistance is the child's need to self-protect. Traumatized children have had experiences that literally threaten their lives and led to an internal working model in which they believe, I'm hateful, not worth anything, undeserving of any good thing. No one really cares about me, and no one and nothing is to be trusted. The world is dangerous and hostile. So here are some ways that we integrate SMART and Theraplay, and it is so helpful to incorporate these attachment-based and relationally focused activities with these sensory body-based movement activities. I'm going to hand it over to Lauren to wrap us up today for our last part of this training.
Thanks, Kendall. So today I get to share with you guys about how we see this work itself out in the playroom. And also, I'll be talking with you some about utilizing trauma-informed yoga. So I wanted to start with a few stories of how some of these interventions that Kendall was just sharing about, how I've seen some of my clients respond. And so I have been working with a kiddo, we'll call him Derek. He is 7, and he is the type of kid, when Kendall said they leave the room and it looks like a tornado, that is him. So the very hyper-aroused, all over the place, the kid that you kind of have to take a deep breath before you dive in with them. And so his parents had shared with me that he virtually never sits down, never, it is truly chaos at all times. And so when he came into the sensory room for the first time, he was sort of drawn to, and part of what I do is just set up the environment, set up the room with some options and allow the kiddo to I just notice what they're drawn to. So he first went over to some weighted balls. So we just have small weighted balls like 1 pound, 4 pounds, 5 pounds. And he was just sort of moving them and placing them in his lap. And he wasn't talking much, but after he'd done that for a few minutes, he started to talk, started to share about himself. So noticing that regulation and the slowing down of his body a little bit. And then after several minutes, he jumps over to the swing, very quick movement over to the swing. And it looks a lot like the swing that is in the picture on this slide. So instead of lying on his belly like this kiddo, he was lying on his back. And I let him, kind of get comfortable for a moment. And then I asked him if I could swing him, because I always want to make sure that any client is comfortable with whatever the movement, whatever the engagement is. So he said yes, and I started to swing him, and he starts directing me faster, faster, faster. And so I'm going as fast as I can. And for me, I would have been sick. But for him, all of a sudden, he says, this feels great. This feels so good. I could be here all day. So our little kiddo, tornado kiddo, is literally laying there, recognizing that in his body, he feels calm. He didn't say that word, but his muscle tone was relaxed. He was just lying there, enjoying the experience. And so this helps to build that relationship with the kid, because they're finally getting into a space where they can feel calm in their body, that there would be hope to move towards that cognitive piece, and that comes along with it. So I'm going to share one other story with you. That little guy was 7, but this also works. I've seen this work with teens too. So any of you work with teens, sometimes having just getting them out of their shell, off their cell phone to talk to you is, it can be a challenge. So I've been working with Greta for a while. She's 15. And for several sessions, there was just kind of a very low energy, hypo-aroused, the other side of that spectrum of arousal. And we hadn't been meeting in our sensory room, the room with the swing. We'd just been kind of hanging out in our playroom. And so this session, I decided, let's see how the sensory room goes. So we move in there, and immediately she goes to the swing that's in the center of the room, and she sits down, and I sat down sort of, we have a pad in the corner that you can sit on that, padded, obviously. And so I was sitting there, and I just asked her, how's it going? And she's just gently swinging back and forth, kind of matching her energy a little bit. And she just starts filling, just sharing. And like I said, that was the first time that she had ever really shared like that with me. And it was also the first time that I had really utilized movement while talking with her. So in some ways, I would invite you, as if you're a clinician, if you're whatever your role is in working with children, to allow this approach to really revitalize what you're doing and allow you to. It's like a breath of fresh air to be able to use movement in our treatment. Oh. So the other area that I get to kind of run and just love doing is trauma-informed yoga. And so I've done yoga teacher training and lots of trauma training specific to yoga. And so I just want to invite you now to take a couple minutes, if it feels okay to you, and whether you're seated or standing, wherever you're at, I just want to invite you to join into a short practice. So you might start to just sway back and forth a little bit in your seat. Maybe to the left and the right. You have the option here to have your eyes open, or maybe it feels interesting to close them. And as you're ready, you might return to center, to stillness. And then maybe you begin to lift your arms up overhead. And then slowly lowering them back down. Do this again, up and over. Maybe you even look up at your hands above you. Or maybe not. Lowering them back. And if it feels okay to you, maybe you do this a few times, just at your own pace. You can lift the arms in front of you. Maybe you lift them out to the side and up. And again, at whatever pace and for however long feels interesting to you. And I'm going to do this for 3, 2, and 1. You may have noticed in that short little yoga practice that I used language that was invitational. At least that was the goal of it. So I hope it felt that way. And that's one of the biggest differences in trauma-informed yoga as compared to yoga at maybe a local studio, a gym you're a member of. And so really, the way that I use this can you still hear me?
You cut out, and now you're back, Lauren.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Oh my goodness, so sorry.
No worries.
So, I lost my train of thought. I apologize. So, attunement to the energy that your clients are bringing into the room, that the children you're working with are coming in with, is really central to ensuring that your movement practice is trauma-informed. And so, as a therapist one-on-one, or when I'm teaching a full class, I have an idea, an outline of what I'm going to do, but remaining attuned and open to what the clients are bringing into the space that day is really important, because it's less about what I think they need and more about what they're showing us they need and knowing that arousal continuum really is what guides the practice. Allowing for bodily autonomy and choice, giving options. So if you're thinking of referring clients to try one of these movement practices, to try yoga, knowing that the facilitator, the practitioner, the therapist that you're referring to knows and is familiar with the importance of attunement and bodily autonomy in order to ensure a safe environment where we can begin to help the client piece back together what's been fragmented or that they've disconnected from in their body. And so one of the leaders in, one of the leaders in this yoga trauma social work world is Michelle Cassandra Johnson, and she says it best in her book. She says, yoga, the yoga space is for the student, and the teacher is responsible for both holding the space and facilitating a process or class that is responsive to the needs of the class. So lastly, before I hand it back over to Keith, know that in order to utilize these interventions, these methods, it's very important to do so ourselves. One, because it's self-care, as you all have probably heard a million times, and two, because by experiencing it yourself, you can better be present and embodied yourself and able to share in your own experience with them. So doing the short practices like I shared today, it's really the small moments and knowing what is it that you need. The high tempo song that Kendall mentioned, or a nice little stretch like I led you through. So I'm going to pass this over to Keith to finish us out, and thank you all so much for listening.
So one thing that we're really trying to promote through the training that we offer is that this has to be done by everyone involved in the kid's life. We cannot leave this therapeutic intervention, this dosing, this unique knowledge just in the clinic and in the hands of therapists. I'm not a therapist. I get to hang out with these brilliant therapists who guide us in how to use these techniques. But in our own space, with our own training, within our own boundaries, we can learn to be attuned to the needs of children in any of these spaces in which we interact with kids. So as you're thinking about movement and incorporating movement in the lives of children, whether they've experienced stress or trauma or not, we need to think about how to do that in a consistent way in all the programs, in all spaces of their life, and especially educate people as we're doing with Building Strong Brains and some of the other trainings, why it is absolutely necessary to help kids who've experienced high stress and trauma to have this movement as a part of regulation. And as we say, first you must regulate, then you work on that relationship, and then and only then can you get to the reason and reflection, whether that's through therapy or acquiring some of the life skills, academic skills that we want our kids to have. So it is truly a whole brain, whole body, whole community approach in this effort. Harmony is offering more trainings. This is on the slide deck that will be sent out to you if you're interested in learning more about animal-assisted therapy, trauma-informed yoga. You can sign up for some classes. with us, there's information to contact us or to find more about training. Or if you have any specific questions for me or Kendall or Lauren, you can email me and I will pass them along to the right person to answer them. And here's a list of reference and resources for you all. A lot of these things we've mentioned in the training, but if you want to get into more depth, you have those references. So with that, back over to you, Serena, and if there's any questions in the last few minutes, we'll be glad to try to answer them. And we are willing to stay on a few extra minutes. If you have to go, thank you very much for being a part of this. It's an honor for us at Harmony to spend this time with you and share what we're doing. But we'll be glad to stick around and talk some more. And if you have to go but have questions, please feel free and email me. Serena, back over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I want to take a question from Jill Amos. She asked, do you address touch to improve regulation?
It kind of cut out.
Oh, Miss Amos asked if you address touch to improve regulation. Were you able to hear me, Kendall?
Do we address touch to improve or, I apologize.
To improve regulation.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about it with parents that we serve, and with our own staff, we provide training on that because there is sort of an intimacy barrier that sometimes you can cross inadvertently. Teachers can do that, parents can do that, caregivers and supports. So we talk about just noticing that child's level of arousal and regulation, and noticing that and being respectful of that as we are incorporating touch. And there are some children who, of course, really crave and want that. And then there are others who it's too overwhelming for them. And so we talk about how to approach that in an effective way.
Thank you. And Lori Elam asks, where do I find different techniques or interventions to help a child regulate? Were you able to hear me?
Yes, and I can talk about that, or if others want to share. You can always, if you can find a trained provider, so a therapist locally in your area who is trained in any of these types of interventions that we've discussed today, that can be really helpful. I would also say to look maybe at some of the zones of regulation materials that you can find online, and those might be helpful. Lauren or Keith, if you all have any other suggestions.
We did a series on harmony at home when quarantine first started, and so we do have some videos with actual activities that different therapists and coworkers here are leading you through as a family, and so that could be a good resource and guide you through. And I'll leave it at that.
Now, in addition to that, for those of you who are parenting your own children or foster children, Dan Siegel's work, The Whole Brain Child, is very helpful in giving some of that guidance. Anything Karen Purvis writes or you can find is extremely helpful, and that's stuff that non-clinicians can use. And when you get into some of the more intense sort of sensory and somatic issues, we're finding that consulting with an occupational therapist is so helpful to kind of hone in on what exactly is needed and some approaches that can help. So pull on the experts out there, but a lot of the stuff we can take home and adapt in our everyday family life in the classroom and such. Somebody asked about the videos. You can find some of those on our webpage, and it's the Harmony at Home subpage on our main site. Serena?
Yes, we have one more question here from Cassandra. With embodied play, since I work with teenagers, can this be something like basketball?
Yes, I see Lauren and Kendall nodding their heads. When I worked in residential treatment, before we knew any of this stuff, we found that basketball worked. And I had a testimony from a foster parent I was in a meeting with recently who said, I would try to sit down and talk with my foster son, and sit down on the couch or sit down on at the dinner table, and I'd get nothing out of it. And took him outside and we started shooting baskets together and passing the ball. And you get into that rhythmic, relational, repetitive activity that helps them to feel comfortable and helps them to feel safe in our presence. And that's very helpful. You may stay away from competitive basketball, one-on-one games or even team games. Some kids aren't ready for that. Some kids thrive with that sort of competition. So gauge where the kid is comfortable. But yes, any sort of parallel play that you can do even with a teenager is very helpful. Kendall, Lauren, anything else you want to add to that?
I think you covered it, Keith. Thank you.
And Mr. Johnson asked about Dr. Perry's book, and so I put a link in there. It's a good read, and it should guide you as to where you can purchase that or get it on audio.
I also included a link for our Harmony at Home page.
I think we have addressed the questions. Does anyone else? You have so many awesome comments just about, the information, how it connects with strong brains. We really appreciate the references. We want a recording of the event, which we will have on the TCCY website, and that'll be sent out tomorrow. Let's see. Kendall gave some great information about zones of regulation. I'm not seeing any other comments at this time. When you were talking about your sensory room and your swing at the beginning of the pandemic, I bought myself a hammock in my backyard, and and I was like, hey, that's really helped me regulate a lot, because I go out and take breaks and swing in the hammock and look at the trees. So
yeah,
I think it's an aha moment for me.
I think it's amazing because we tend to want to complicate the therapeutic approach, but a lot of the activities we do are very simple, very connected to activities that you might see caregivers doing with young children to promote that attachment, and also, just like we were talking about, a swing or playing basketball or walking, even that bilateral stimulation, moving both sides of your body, that can just get your brain moving and working and helping to come up with new ideas and ways to heal.
Yeah, it's really inspirational to see that mind-body approach being used therapeutically, and that we're moving towards not separating the mind and the body. That actually, the mind and the body are the same thing. So I love work like that. So on that note, thank you so much for the work you do. I think I'm gonna check out this trauma-informed yoga myself. I think that sounds amazing. Thank you for this presentation, and so interesting. I love how neurobiology is just where it's at in our therapeutic approaches and understanding of behavior. Just exciting stuff. So thank you again, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank thanks everyone so much, and I'll send out certificates and a link to the video and information from the presentation tomorrow. So thank you all so much. Thank you all for the work you do. And take care. See you later. Bye.